Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Lon Schiffbauer, and today we are going to talk about entering foreign markets. You've made the decision that you want to go global, and so you want to get into all these markets. All right, how? Well, there are a variety of ways to enter a foreign market, and much like with strategy, which we talked about in our previous video, it's not just a menu. You've got to decide which approach works best for your company, your service, and your product. So let's talk about these. We'll come on over here. And yeah, we kind of need to decide, first of all, where are we going to go? And we've talked about some of these things before. Where is the best place to enter? I'll put a link. Gosh, I keep getting mixed up on which direction. I'll put a link to the previous video we talked about in terms of, making the decision where to go and finding new market opportunities. So we need to figure out which market we want to enter. When is the best time to enter these markets, and to what degree should we enter them? So let's think about timing for a moment, right? Do you want to get in early? Do you want to be the first mover? Well, now that's pretty cool because you can capture first mover advantage, preempt the competition, and be the first to establish a presence. I mean, when you're the only game in town, you're going to get a lot of business. Thing is, first mover advantage can be really expensive because there's no infrastructure in place. There's no playbook that you can follow. You're on the vanguard, you're the one, blazing new trails, and that you're going to make a lot of mistakes. It's going to be expensive, right? So maybe you're going to wait. You're going to wait until the competition has moved in, has taken all the risks and paid the pioneering costs, and proven whether or not the market is viable. They're going to do all that. And then once they've kind of set up the infrastructure and the playbook and gotten everything in place, then you can come in lower cost, lower risk. Well, yeah, but now you're a competitor and you've got a smaller market share and you got to figure out how to grow that market share, something that we talked about in our strategy video before. Okay, so you got to kind of think about that. And then you got to think about, well, are we going in big time? I mean, we're just putting all our eggs in this basket, or are we just dipping our toe in there, right? I mean, you don't have to invest billions of dollars and euros and yens and RMB to get in, be huge in a market. You can just practice a little bit of risk taking and get in. So for example, with these videos I make, I've kind of thought, gee, I ought to get some of these videos translated into other languages. That's relatively low cost to me and allows me to dip my toe into the global market. Okay? All right. So you got to make that decision. But then once you've decided, hey, when are we going to do this timing wise? And to what degree are we going to do it? Are we going all in or are we just going to dabble? You then need to think about your modes of entry. Okay. How are you going to actually get in? These are the 7 modes of entry that we are going to talk about. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. One of them is called turnkey. All right. Turnkey is when a firm agrees to set up a plant, or a shop or whatever you're setting up for a foreign client and hand over the key when the plant or store is fully operational. Fully operational. Okay. So for example, this is a screenshot of a turnkey construction. They are building a 7-Eleven, which, as we know from a previous lecture, is actually a Japanese company. Okay. Link, that sort of thing. So what are they doing? Are they just building the 7-Eleven? No, a turnkey company does not just build the building. They get the licenses, they get the equipment installed, they hire the employees, they train the employees, they get the supply chains set up, they stock the shelves, they do everything. So that by the time they turn the key over to you, it is a turnkey operation. Everything's done. The shop here, in this case a 7-Eleven, is fully up and running. That's pretty sweet, pretty swanky, right? Now, this is pretty nice. A construction company has the know-how and necessary to set up the plant in the country. They know how to get all the building permits, hiring, all the legal things. They know all this stuff. They're experts. That's why you outsource it to a turnkey company. On the other hand, you know what? That's a really long-term investment and commitment to the country, right? It's like if you're only experimenting with setting up a shop, a plant, a store, what have you, a franchise. Actually, franchise is different. We'll talk about that. If you're only dabbling with the idea, this is a big investment. Also, if you're handing over some capability to a turnkey company that's rather unique, that company could say, you know what, we could do it on our own. We could do this and compete with you. And that brings me to probably the most important point. You may have to share an awful lot of your technology and your processes to give this turnkey company the information they need to build this facility. So if you're manufacturing something and you have special tools and special equipment and special processes and special materials that you put into producing your product, you may not want to share that with a different company. Okay? Pros and cons. All right. Next one is licensing. All right. This is super common. When a company, the licensor, allows a foreign entity, the licensee, the right to produce and sell its products in exchange for a royalty fee. Okay? So you take Sony, for example. Sony, a Japanese company. Of course, they make more than just equipment. They own Spider-Man. Okay? So American character owned by a Japanese company. They own Spider-Man. Well, any Spider-Man toys or pictures or whatever that you see, that's a licensed product. Sony did not produce that Spider-Man toy. They allowed a toy manufacturer to produce it and pay them a royalty fee as a license. BBC Worldwide, British company, they license a ton of their stuff to other networks and so forth. Disney, a US company, any Disney product you see, Disney did not make. They licensed it. And then Ferrari, an Italian company, sure, they make their cars, but if you have a Ferrari keychain or a Ferrari bottle opener or a Ferrari hat, they license a ton of stuff. Ferrari coasters and floor mats. Ferrari did not make those. They licensed the right to another company to produce them in exchange for a royalty fee. So maybe this is a route you want to go. What are the pros? Licensees puts up most of the operating capital, so it's an inexpensive way for a licensor to enter a market. So what does this mean? Well, let's say that I make the most popular, I have an incredible brand, Nutshell Brainery. That's right. Nutshell Brainery is such a popular brand. Everybody wants a Nutshell Brainery shirt. Doesn't exist, but you get the idea. Well, I don't want to go into all these markets, so I'm just going to license Nutshell Brainery out to all these companies who will make the shirts, sell them, and pay me a royalty fee. So it's like really an inexpensive way for me to enter a market with Nutshell Brainery. You can also avoid trade barriers, right? Remember in a previous episode, we talked about trade barriers. Well, there are no trade barriers when you're licensing, so pretty sweet. On the other hand, the licensor loses tight control over manufacturing, marketing, and the strategy. I can't control how other people sell my Nutshell Brainery shirts, right? Complicates the flow of money when investing in other countries. We're going to talk about this in a future episode. But money can't always leave a country where that money is earned, right? So might be a little complicated. May involve licensing technology and know-how, something that's a competitive advantage. So that's another wrinkle. Okay. Franchising. Yeah, lots of things are franchised out there, right? Specialized form of licensing in which the franchisor sells intangible and tangible property to the franchisee and insists on the rules to conduct business. So, what are franchises? Well, 7-Eleven, once again, a Japanese company. Every 7-Eleven in the world that I know of, I shouldn't say every, right? But they're franchises, all right? IKEA, a Swedish company. There's one just down the street from me. That's a franchise. Here's a screen capture of a franchise company in China that franchises out Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut is owned by Pepsi, which I believe is still an American company, but franchises all over the world, right? So that's a great way to enter a market, right? Pros and cons, once again. Similar to those of franchising, low cost for the franchisor to enter a market and get around trade barriers. So pretty nice. However, challenges in maintaining quality standards exacerbated by physical distances. So a good friend of mine used to own a Cold Stone franchise. This is an American company, and she was running this in the U.S. Well, Cold Stone actually had a ton of controls. You have to sell these products. You have to display them in this way. They need to be set up this way. I mean, tons and tons of controls. And they would send around an auditor quite often to make sure that you're running your franchise in accordance with the franchisee or's requirements, in this case, Cold Stone. Well, now, if you're franchising around the world, you need to set up a whole infrastructure to maintain quality control and audit quality control at all these different locations around the world. That's a heavy lift. Okay, may inhibit the ability to take funds out of one country and put them into another. Once again, we'll talk more about that later, but not all countries allow money earned by a foreign entity to leave that country. So you need to reinvest it where you are. Okay, joint venture. We actually talked about joint venture in our previous video on strategies. You know, when two or more companies get together and create an independent company. Now, this is not only a strategy, but it's also a mode of entry. In this case, General Motors used this strategy to enter China. They got together with SAIC, and they together created a third company, SAIC GM Wuling, right? So this way, General Motors was able to enter China, which they were not allowed to do on their own, okay? Benefits a local partner's knowledge and expertise, benefit from local partners' knowledge and expertise, share the costs and the risks, politically preferable in many countries, including China. On the cons, you may have to give up control, right? And some technology and competitive advantage because you're dumping them in this new company. And then lack of control over the newly created company. Think of a newly created company as parents creating a kid, right? So the parents give birth, adopt whatever this child, and they have a vision for the child. But at some point, the child grows up and says, you know what, I'm doing things my own way. All right. You're not the boss of me. I'm going to do whatever I want. And the parents wring their hands and fret and so forth. But it's true. This newly created company, they can do whatever they want. All right. Wholly owned subsidiary. You can buy your way into a country. Just buy it, right? This is a form of acquisition that is referred to as brownfield. We're going to talk about greenfield in a moment, but brownfield is, it's called brownfield because the land, the facility is already built up. So it's brown because there's tarmac, it's a parking lot, it's a building, it's all developed. Whereas greenfield is pristine and nothing but a greenfield, right? Farms. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a moment. But this is when a firm owns 100% of the stock of a foreign entity by way of foreign direct investment. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. Through greenfield or brownfield acquisition. All right. So Google, an American company, Alibaba, a Chinese company, these and other online companies, Amazon, for example, they are famous for just gobbling up, buying companies and making them, wholly owned subsidiaries. Sometimes they're brought into the fold. Sometimes they just remain as a wholly owned subsidiary. Okay. Great way to get into a country. Just buy a company over there. Now, pros and cons. Tight control of a firm's competitive advantage and technology. You can buy the companies that really augment, add to your own competitive advantage. Tight control over operations. You can run the company any way you want. It's a wholly owned subsidiary. Allows a firm to take advantage of economies of scale, comparative advantage, and other efficiencies. We've talked about these things, okay? But it's not perfect. It is so freaking expensive. This is far and away the most expensive option. So you had better know that you're in it for the long haul and that it's going to work. And it's really, really, really risky because it doesn't always work. In fact, you'd be surprised how often it doesn't work. So, like I say, can be really, really, really expensive, but there's a lot of advantages. Company can quickly, establish itself in the market, preempts competitors from moving in. As a matter of fact, a lot of companies will buy another company not because they need it, but because they know that their competitor needs those skill sets and capabilities. And they don't want their competitor to get those skill sets and capabilities. So they'll buy the company and just kind of shut it down. It's a tough world out there. Generally less risky than a greenfield strategy, the brownfield strategy, buying an existing company, right? However, it always involves some level of foreign direct investment. Whether you are buying an existing company or building on a green field, a farm, right, what have you, a new company, this is foreign direct investment. When a company invests directly in building facilities or buying facilities to produce or market a product in a foreign country. All right. So, for example, I'm here in the state of Utah in the United States, and, number one best state for doing business, according to Forbes, back in, when was this published? I don't see when it was published. Wasn't that long ago. Okay. So, like, for example, I drive a Toyota. That's a Japanese car, but my guess is that the Toyota itself was manufactured here in the U.S., probably up in the Midwest, northern Midwest somewhere, or Ohio or something like that, because Toyota practiced foreign direct investment, FDI, by building manufacturing sites here in the United States. So Toyota does this, Subaru does this, all kinds of companies build manufacturing facilities in one country so that they can more easily access that market. No trade tariffs if you're not exporting, you're building them here in a given country, okay? Greenfield site, by the way, when a company builds a whole new facility, this is a picture of when Intel Corporation, where I used to work, the chip manufacturer, they built this was the first time they went global. First time they went international. They built their very first fab, greenfield, in Penang, Malaysia, okay? That building right there, that is referred to as PG1 because that is the first building of many that went up in Penang, therefore PG. PG1, when I lived in Malaysia and worked out there, they had PG12. Okay, so they have 12 facilities out there. Today, they might have more. I don't know, okay? So, yeah, that was when Intel first went global. All right. But then the last one, and probably the one you think of the most, because it's really darn common. Last way to enter a market, exporting. You know exporting, selling a product or service produced in one country to a buyer in another country. You know, if it's a product, you put it on one of these big old ships and these containers and send it across the world and get it stuck in the Suez Canal, right? That's exporting. Really, really, really common. And for really good reasons. It's attractive. Avoid the costs associated with setting up manufacturing facilities in another country. I don't want to set up manufacturing facilities over there. I want to build it here, ship it over. Less expensive way of gaining entrance to a market. I don't have to invest in pioneering costs to forge my way into a new market. I'll just ship it and sell it. When sales dip, I can pivot to other markets. Hey, things are going really well. I'm selling this in Malaysia. But then, well, you know what? My Malaysia sales are dropping, but my India sales are going up. So I'm just going to redirect my efforts away from Malaysia and over to India. Works great, right? Well, now you may miss out on some economies of scale, right? So that's one aspect that may work against you. There's transportation costs, but there's also trade barriers such as tariffs. Exporting is where trade barriers really work their magic, dark magic, if you will, right? So you're really, really, really susceptible to trade wars when you're exporting, all right? Now, but it's very common. It's a very common practice, exporting. And I know many people, young folks, college students who start exporting businesses. There are some common mistakes then that I would like to kind of tune you into, right? One is waiting until your local market is fully saturated before thinking about exporting. No, don't wait until your market here is saturated and then think about exporting. You should always be thinking about developing new markets, no matter how much penetration you have here in your local market. Waiting until the world comes to them rather than proactively going out and developing markets, right? So, yeah, every once in a while, if you're building something here, you might get some foreign order and you go, okay, I'll fulfill it. But I'm going to wait until I get a lot of foreign orders before I really think about exporting seriously. No. You need to go out there and push. You need to go out there and sell, right? Lack of experience and going it alone sours new entrants into going any further into exporting. We're going to explore this one. So check this out, though. According to a UN report, the typical transaction may involve 30 parties and up to 60 original documents, 360 documents copied, all of which need to be processed. Oh my gosh, really? Check this out. Check this out. Here's the thing about exporting. It is very, very, very cumbersome because there is a lack of trust. And it's understandable. Let me show you why. So you're asking two people, two parties to do business together. These folks have never met. Most of the time, an exporter never meets the importer. And when you're first starting, right? You've never met. You live in different countries. You speak different languages. You abide, or maybe you don't abide, by different legal systems. And if one of you disappears, it's very hard to track them down. It's really tough. So, the exporting system, therefore, really is rather cumbersome and high maintenance to account for this. I'm going to give you a quick run through of what's involved. This is not the exact process. Every process is slightly different. I've simplified this one quite a bit to make it easier to understand. But understand that I've simplified this, so that shows you how complex the real thing can be. Okay, so let's take a look at this. All right, first thing is an importer places an order with the exporter. Okay, so let's say I am here in the US and I make nutshell brainery hats. All right, and you place an order for nutshell brainery hats. And you are off in the Philippines. You're in the Philippines. I'm in the US. You placed an order for nutshell brainery hats. You have the money. All right. You just placed an order. You have the money. I agree to fulfill the order. I still have the goods. So you placed the order, but you have the money. I agreed to fulfill the order, but I still have the hats. Okay. So what do we do next? Well, you in the Philippines, you need to arrange a letter of credit with your bank, okay? A letter of credit is a commitment by the importer's bank to pay once the exporter ships the goods and presents the required documentation to the exporter's bank as proof of shipment, okay? The importer's bank then sends the letter of credit to my bank, the exporter's bank, okay? So you went off to your bank, you set up a letter of credit, your bank sent that letter of credit to my bank. Okay, good. Now, I ship the goods receiving a bill of lading, all right? I'm willing to ship the goods because I know we have a letter of credit, so I know I'm going to get paid. I haven't been paid yet. You still have the money. But the letter of credit says I'm going to get paid. So I ship the goods with a bill of credit, a bill of lading, a shipping receipt when the carrier delivers the goods at a predetermined destination. At this point, the shipping company sort of owns the goods. If they go down at sea, if anything happens to them, they're liable. So I don't have the goods anymore. I don't really have ownership of them. I kind of share ownership with the shipping company. In effect, the shipping company owns the goods now. Okay. So I then the exporter presents a bill of exchange to the bank now that I've shipped the goods. A written order that requires the importer to pay an agreed upon sum to the exporter on demand or at a predetermined date. So the bill of exchange says, hey, I shipped the stuff. You need to pay me when it arrives or on this particular date. My bank, the exporter's bank, sends the bill of exchange to the importer's bank, to your bank in the Philippines. The importer's bank accepts and then returns the bill of exchange to the exporter's bank. So your bank in the Philippines takes the bill of exchange. They write accept, they stamp it, accept, and send it back to my bank. It is now a mature bill of exchange. Exporter's bank informs the importer that they have received the bill of exchange. It's now mature. Okay, so we all agree on things, right? We're almost there, folks. We've almost completed a transaction. Now the importer pays their bank. You in the Philippines, you give your money to your bank. So the bank has the money. Your bank has the money. The exporter's bank delivers the mature bill of exchange to the importer's bank, which means your bank technically owns the goods. So your bank has the money, your bank has the goods. The importer's bank pays the exporter. So I now have the money, and the bank transfers the goods to their clients and any money to the respective clients. Okay? So now you own the goods. Simple. It's not simple. So here's some advice. If you start doing an exporting company, go to an export management company, an EMC, all right? They are great for first-time exporters so that they can learn the ropes and so forth. They act as an export marketing, market development on behalf of their client to help first-time exporters get set. Okay? All right. So, folks, there you are. All kinds of modes of entry that you can consider when entering a foreign market. Remember, choose the one that is best suited to you, your position, your strategy, and your long-term objectives, and you might find some success. All right? I hope all this was helpful. Stick around. We've got more coming, but until we talk again, have a fantastic day.